It's my pleasure to introduce this amazing woman. The Reverend Dr. Margaret Bullitt-Jonas is an Episcopal priest, author, retreat leader, and climate activist. She has been a lead organizer of many Christian and interfaith events about care for Earth, and she leads spiritual retreats in the United States and Canada on spiritual resilience and resistance in the mindset of climate emergency. Her latest book, Rooted and Rising, Voices of Courage in a Time of Climate Crisis, is a co-edited collection of essays by religious environmental activists. She's been arrested in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere to protest expanded use of fossil fuels. She serves as a missioner for creation care in the Episcopal Diocese of Western Mass and Southern New England Conference, United Church of Christ, and as a creation care advisor for the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. Her website, revivingcreation.org, includes blog posts, sermons, videos, and articles. And we're very excited to have her join and share today. Thank you.
And I'm going to spotlight Margaret for everyone. I think that will work with the PowerPoint. Yes, Rowan?
It should, and I can mess with it if it's not.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Lois, for the warm introduction, and thank you, Susan, for inviting me. Thank you all for making space for my reflections on a talk that I'm calling The Joy in Climate Justice, how we pray, learn, act, and advocate for God's creation. So I'll just quickly do a land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you from the beautiful countryside of Ashfield in Western Massachusetts, which is historically the land of the Nipmuc and Pocumtuck peoples. So I'm hoping to be able to do 4 things in my time with you, and I may run out of time, but here's what I would do if I could do it all. I'd like to tell a story tell the story of how God led me into this ministry. Second, I'd like to reflect briefly using a PowerPoint, if we can make it work, on how our faith inspires and sustains our efforts to tackle climate change and ecological degradation. And third, I will talk, I hope, about 4 ways we can make a difference as we pray, learn, act, and advocate. And finally, to give a little review of what's happening in Province 1 as creation care ministries begin to grow and strengthen, which I'm really happy to say that's happening across New England. And then to have some time at the end for Q&A and conversation. So that's my plan. So the story of how I got into this ministry, which I would never have predicted, you just never know where God's going to lead you. As you know, I'm an Episcopal priest. I'm based in Western Mass, and I travel around trying to inspire and mobilize people of faith to confront the climate emergency and join the movement to heal the web of life. So what became my life work began with a personal journey of healing. Many years ago, as an adolescent and a young adult, I was in the grip of an eating disorder. So I would eat compulsively and in secret, and then I would compensate for the binges by fasting and going on these amazing diets and by running and exercising. So it was a crazy life. And finally, when I was 30 years old, in 1982, I hit bottom, and I finally walked into a 12-step meeting and admitted that I was powerless over food and that my life had become unmanageable and I needed to turn my life over to a higher power. And that's when I finally went back to church. So I learned how to pray, and I got lots of support from 12-step community. And I finally began to live in peace with my body. And I was so amazed by how completely my life changed that I finished what I was doing and I went to seminary. I needed to know, who is the God who just saved my life? So that's the story that I tell in the first book I wrote, which is a memoir called Holy Hunger. And it seems to me that our bodies are the first bit of nature entrusted to our care. And for some of us, it's no small feat to learn how to live in a peaceful way inside our own skin. So I was ordained in June of 1988, and that happened to be the same month that NASA climate scientist Jim Hansen was testifying to the US Senate that scientists were deeply concerned about the effects on our planet's climate and ecosystems of burning fossil fuels. And for some reason, that news stuck with me. I remember reading this article and being shocked. And I began to keep track of what scientists at that point were calling it the greenhouse effect. So that summer, so this is back in '88, I traveled to Alaska with my husband and his daughter for a little vacation to experience the wild landscapes of glaciers and mountains and forests, and I completely fell in love. And then that fall in 1988, I began my first job in ordained ministry in a parish north of Boston. Well, in 1989, on Good Friday, you may remember, the Exxon Valdez oil tanker slammed into a reef off the coast of Alaska and spilled something like 11 million gallons of oil. And maybe you can remember the images of the cormorants on the beach that were just covered in oil. And I took that assault very personally. I loved Alaska, and here it was under assault. And to me, it's a very interesting moment when we begin to take the ecological crisis personally, when it's no longer someone else's problem, someone else's issue. I've got other things on my plate. There comes a moment when we realize we care deeply. And I noticed that the Exxon Valdez oil spill had taken place on Good Friday. And it looked to me as if we were all witnessing the crucifixion of Earth. So the next time it was my turn to preach, which was the Sunday after Easter, second Sunday of Easter, I stepped into the pulpit and I preached the first sermon I had ever preached or ever heard about the natural world and God's care for the natural world. And into that sermon, I poured everything I could think of, whatever theology I could think of. I poured into it my outrage and my sorrow about our disturbed relationship with the earth. And I made an ardent appeal for eco-conversion, saying, look, we're like Saul on the road to Damascus, and we need to turn around and change course. So I sat down after my sermon, and I felt kind of satisfied with myself. Like, yeah, that was good job, Margaret. That was a good sermon. Well, at the end of the service, as I was shaking people's hands as parishioners left, a very nice woman came up to me and said, thank you for your sermon, but I don't get it. What does Christianity have to do with caring about the earth? What does religion have to do with ecology? You know, it's a great question, and it's not a surprise. It's not surprising to me that she asked that question. I'd grown up in the Episcopal Church, and like her, I heard nothing in sermons or in Sunday school or in confirmation class or actually even in seminary about how faith in God connects with caring for God's creation. And yet, obviously, by the late 1980s, it was becoming increasingly clear that the Earth's life systems are in trouble. And I began to wonder, if God can help one addict like me to make peace with her body, is it not possible that God can help all humanity to make peace with the body of Earth? It seems we need a power beyond ourselves if we're going to turn this thing around. So that became a guiding question for me. For 25 years, I was worked in parish ministry, and I would make these part-time forays into climate activism. But eventually my alarm about the climate crisis led me at the end of 2013. I went to my bishop, wonderful Bishop Doug Fisher in the Diocese of Western Massachusetts. I told him I needed to leave parish ministry, and I asked if he could possibly create a position for me in the diocese so that I could focus all my attention on mobilizing Christians and people of faith to place care for God's creation at the center of our moral and spiritual concern. And he gave it a little thought, and he said, yes, if we can find the money. And just then a parishioner was selling his stock in pipelines and wanting to donate that to the diocese to start a ministry around climate change. And that became the seed money for my job. And I, it's another moment of, is God good or what? So I made up this title, a missioner for creation care. And the thinking in the word missioner is that I'm on a mission. I'm outside the boundaries of the church building. Actually, we're all on a mission. Missioner for creation care. And it quickly became an ecumenical job. And now it's, so I'm serving both dioceses, Episcopal Diocese in Massachusetts, and also the UCC in Southern New England. And I, as mentioned in the introduction, I have a website, revivingcreation.org, which is full of articles and books and videos and things like that. So that's my story. That's how I got here, through the grace of God. And now what I'd like to do is to share a brief PowerPoint about how Christians can, how our Christian faith empowers and sustains our work to save the earth. And I'm going to share my screen if all goes well. Now I'm hoping, can I have a thumbs up? Can someone see the screen? Is this working? Oh, thanks be to God. All right, the joy in climate justice. This is just a little PowerPoint to walk you through some thinking. This is me, my world's longest job titles. And this is the book that Susan mentioned. It came out just a few years ago. It's an anthology of 21 essays by colleagues in the faith and environment movement. And Leah Shade and I asked them to write about their sources of spiritual strength as they fight to protect a habitable world. We asked them, what gives you courage? What gives you hope? And the book includes study questions and spiritual reflections and spiritual exercises. So I hope it's useful, not just for individual reading, but also for book study groups and for interfaith dialogue. I'm very interested in how prayer and spiritual practice can sustain our struggles for a just and equitable society and for a livable planet. I'm going to say more about that in a moment. So next, I'd like to show a couple of images. And I'm sure you recognize this fellow. It's an image of St. Francis of Assisi, a Canticle of Creation by Nancy Earle. You'll remember, of course, he's a 13th century friar. He's often called the patron saint of ecology, living a life of radical simplicity and poverty. And what particularly interests me is that he experienced such a radical kinship with the natural world, with natural earthy elements and creatures, that he could speak, as we know, of brother sun and sister moon. And this image, I hope, conveys how interpenetrated he was in his identity by the sun, the moon, the stars, you can see the wolf, the snake, the rabbit. I don't know how Francis prayed in detail, but I've read that it sounds like he was a very contemplative person, and that his basic prayer was to ask the question to God, God, who am I and who are you? Just to sit with that question. Who am I? Who are you? And apparently you pray that prayer for a while, and look what happens to you. We discover that our identity does not stop with our skin. We have porous and permeable boundaries. We are interpenetrated we are dependent on and kin with all of God's creation. So this is a vision of reality that is foreign to many of us who live on screens and who spend most of our time indoors. But it's a vision which says God is giving God's self to us in and as the sun and the moon and the creatures of this earth. Obviously, it's easy to sentimentalize and romanticize Francis, but in an increasingly degraded natural world, what would it mean to take our place as humans who experience this kind of intimate connection with the wolf and the wind and the whale? Human beings are on a long journey back to understanding our connections with Earth. That's the task before us in a time when the life systems of Earth are deeply compromised, when many of us are deeply alienated from the Earth. How do we find our way back to union with God, with Spirit, with all of God's creation? And then to reclaim that ancient biblical understanding, mystical understanding, one that was never lost by so-called pagan people or by indigenous peoples, that the natural world is sacred and that it belongs to God and is filled with God. How do we reclaim our partnership, not just with our fellow human beings, but with the rest of God's creation? Next, I would like to share the next image, a very different image of Francis, which I was delighted when I found this. It's a statue at a cemetery in Illinois. And I love this image because it conveys so much about the qualities of his attention. Like if you just think about it, what do you see? What does this statue convey about the character of Francis? I don't have the capacity as I share screens to do a little chat conversation with you, but like, what do you see in his gaze? And I'll just tell you what I see. I'm seeing humility. You know, he's bending down to make eye contact with this little being. I see friendliness. I see curiosity. I see him noticing this one bird in particular. He doesn't have that worldview of like, you know, you've seen one sparrow, you've seen them all. It's more like, who are you? What's it like to be you? So this to me invites us to reflect on in what spirit are we turning to each other and to the natural world. Spiritual life is fundamentally about relationship. And you may remember that Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher, in his very well-known classic book, I and Thou, contrasts two different kinds of relationship we can have with anything. We can have an I-it relationship or an I-thou relationship. An I-it relationship is one where we treat the other as a thing, as something for our use, something functional to serve us. In an I-thou relationship, we encounter the other as a subject in their own right. In an I-thou relationship, I am willing to be changed. There's a vulnerability to an I-thou relationship. There's a sacredness to it. We're both meeting each other as subjects, as equals. So as we turn to the natural world, the question for us is, do we see the natural world only in terms of its use to us as an I-it relationship? So, you know, you look at a tree and say, how many board feet of lumber are in that tree? Or you look out at a field, I wonder what those acres are worth. Or are we open to the possibility that God wants to speak to us through the tree, the stone, the wind, the cloud, the sparrow? Is it possible that when we go out into the natural world, we actually are encountering the divine? And that is a process of moving from a spirituality of alienation from the natural world to a spirituality of intimacy with the natural world. The historian Thomas Berry says, the universe is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. So I want to assure us that encountering God in the natural world is not some wacky New Age invention. It's actually reclaiming a deep part of our own tradition. So this is Aquinas, back in the 13th century. Revelation comes in 2 volumes, the Bible and nature. And this for many of us is startling to hear, because we often think of ourselves as people of the book. And the God I grew up with honestly had no body. To me, growing up, being a good Christian was all about distancing oneself from the body and transcending the body, both my own body and the body of the natural world. I imagined that God was pure spirit, invisible, ineffable, accessed only through words, texts, and right beliefs. And so the natural world and its wild diversity of creatures was essentially irrelevant and dispensable. It was just the backdrop to what was really important, which luckily for us is human beings and the disembodied soul. And I learned as I did some more studying that since the time of the Reformation, most of Western Christianity, with the exception of some corners of Western Christianity, so like the Celtic Christianity, but on the whole, most of Western Christianity had very little to say about the salvation of the natural world and the cosmos, and as if only one species, Homo sapiens, was of any interest to God. So what a healing it is. What a restoration of the ancient biblical understanding to know that the earth is holy, its creatures are holy, the whole created world is lit up with the power and presence of God. And that actually is part of the meaning of the incarnation. God takes on human flesh and matter, so that, and matter and spirit and human and divine, we are all interconnected. So thanks to the incarnation, God is in the human body and in the body of earth. And here comes another of our forebears. Aquinas is our great Catholic forebear, and here comes Martin Luther, our Protestant forebear. God writes the Bible, not in the Bible alone, but also on trees and flowers and stars. And that means we must treat the earth with reverence and respect. And if we don't, it's like spitting in the face of the Creator. So when we fall in love, we want to protect what we love. Spiritual experience naturally flows into action. And so rooted and rising, we want to rise up to bear witness to the love of God in Christ. So this is a picture from back in 2001. I think it was actually one of the first public protests against burning fossil fuels. We gathered in front of the Department of Energy in Washington, DC, and we were all different faith traditions praying and singing to protest the intention to drill for more oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So 22 of us blocked the doors of the Department of Energy. This is a picture shortly before we were arrested. And we were supported by friends. And I want to share this picture as well, because I just want to note that there are many roles we can play in the struggle to heal the earth. Nonviolent civil disobedience is one role that some of us will feel called to play, but there are many, many ways we can take part in the great movement to save life on this planet. Let's see if I can forward the next slide. Apologies. I'll get this up. We are stuck on healing the earth and healing the people. They're worse places to be stuck. Oh, good. There we are. Let's see. Okay. Fast forward 15 years. Some folk, you probably remember the Standing Rock encampment in North Dakota. I went out there for the Interfaith Day of Prayer in December 2016, and I was thrilled that Michael Curry went out there as well to speak and to pray on behalf of the Sioux and to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline. It was an extraordinary, historic, spiritually based resistance, with people coming literally from around the world to stand with the Standing Rock Sioux and to say that water is sacred, water is life, and we have to stop construction of this Dakota Access Pipeline. Let's see if I can. It was a deeply spiritual struggle in which activism was a form of sacred ceremony. Nearly everything of importance at the camp took place around the sacred fire, which it never went out. There was storytelling, singing, dancing, drumming, praying. All the daily activities were steeped in prayer. The whole nonviolent struggle was sustained by prayer, part of a long struggle against genocide. And on that afternoon, when I and so many other faith leaders were there, this is a picture of joy. We got the news that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had denied the final permit that would have allowed the Dakota Access Pipeline to go under the Missouri River. So it was an afternoon of absolute rejoicing and prayer. That wonderful decision was reversed a month later when the Trump administration took over. And the pipeline today continues to operate, and activists are calling on the Biden administration to close the pipeline until a full safety and environmental review can be completed. So the basic point I want to convey in this little slideshow is that I'm hoping we can heal the split between so-called spiritual people and activist people, or yeah. We need to, that's one other integration in a union that we need to reclaim. Van Jones put it in a very lovely, simple way. He said, it's in that convergence between spiritual people becoming active and active people becoming spiritual that the hope of humanity now rests. And I'll close with, give Rachel Carson the last word. Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that endure as long as life lasts. So that it's an invitation to root ourselves in prayer and in the gift, as we say in our baptismal promises, in the gift of joy and wonder in all God's works. So I'm going to stop sharing when I figure out where my mouse went. Here we go. Good, I'm back. So, so we've covered a couple of the things I hope to cover. So number 3, let me grab my clock. Okay. So the third thing I'd like quickly to say something about is how will we pray, learn, act, and advocate on behalf of God's creation? When I started this diocesan level work, we kind of created, we thought this was a way of thinking about how to approach the climate emergency and the ecological emergency was through the lens of pray, learn, act, and advocate. And our diocesan website on Creation Care has information about that. Let's see if I can drop that. I'll have, yeah. So just to say a word about each of these in a little more detail. Pray. Okay, so in our preaching, in our prayers, in our worship, how are we going to convey God's love and care, not only for human beings, but for the whole of God's creation? How are we going to bring climate emergency into Sunday morning worship, into prayers and reflections? And what spiritual grounding do we need as individuals to stay steady and in love in a world of a climate changed world full of so much uncertainty? So I'm all about supporting preaching around climate change. It's one of the most effective ways we can spread the word and encourage action. So I've been hosting some webinars, trying to equip clergy. I can't see all of you, but if I could, especially if we were meeting in person, I'd be asking you to raise your hand. Like, how many of you have heard a good, strong sermon about the climate crisis? How many of you who preach have preached a good, strong sermon about climate crisis? This really needs to become part of the DNA of what we do as church. It's important to. So if I hope you will, if you're not a preacher, I hope you will support and encourage the clergy or preachers in your congregation, because it takes a certain amount of guts to stand up there and preach on a topic that's been so polarizing and so politicized. So give your preachers some love and support. So what else can we do around prayer? We can enrich our Sunday morning worship so that our prayers and our music, it makes it more clear that caring for creation is central to who we need to be today. We can design special prayer services that celebrate the sacredness of God's creation. We can pray outdoors. We can celebrate creation season, which I know is now being celebrated in several dioceses in New England, and it's actually celebrated around the world by billions of Christians. A special season from September 1st, which is, I think it's called World Day of Prayer for the Environment. So September 1st to October 4th, which is the feast day of St. Francis. So it gives us this a lovely little invitation opportunity to do some dedicated focusing on earth care during those weeks. Our life of prayer is the foundation of everything else, especially because when the web of life is unraveling before our eyes, we're going to have to ask ourselves, how are we going to maintain courage and hope? What spiritual practices and perspectives are going to sustain us so in our struggle to protect the web of life and to create a more just society? I'm very interested in what helps us move beyond fear and inertia and despair, and to move into the movement to tackle climate change. And that's why my friend Leah Shade and I decided to put together our book, Rooted and Rising. So I'd like to just, in a moment, I'd like to just read a little excerpt from my chapter that I wrote in Rooted and Rising, because I decided to focus on prayer and especially on grief. What do we do with our grief, with our outrage, with our sorrow? Knowing, for example, that 70% of the Amazon rainforest could be gone by the 2030s. Knowing that North America has lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. Maybe you know that today there are half as many wild animals on the planet as there were in 1970. Half as many wild animals are on the planet as in 1970. Scientists are talking about what they're calling a biological annihilation. They're talking about an insect apocalypse. And if we keep burning fossil fuels and stick to business as usual, by the end of this century, the average global temperature will rise 4.2 degrees Celsius, which is the same as 7.6 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not good with numbers, but the main thing to know is that human beings cannot adapt to a world that is that hot. That's if we keep going with business as usual. So how are we going to pray about this? Our brokenhearted prayer may need to be expressive and embodied and visceral and vocal. How else do we pray with our anger and our grief? How else do we pray about ecocide, about the death that humanity is unleashing on Mother Earth and on ourselves? And how else are we going to break through our inertia and despair? So we don't shut down and go numb. As I see it, allowing ourselves to feel our emotional responses to the crisis is how we stay inwardly vital and alive. You may know the work of Robert J. Lifton, who studied Hiroshima survivors, and he talked about psychic numbing. And Joanna Macy, who's a brilliant philosopher. I'm very grateful to her work. She speaks about deadening of the heart. This is what we need to resist, psychic numbing and deadening of the heart. So it's allowing ourselves to feel what we feel and knowing that our emotions can become a source of energy for action to address the climate emergency. So I'm going to read just a little bit of what I wrote in Rooted in Rising as a way of just showing how one person prays with all this. Recently, a company began cutting down trees in the woods behind my home, clearing space for co-housing, an intentional neighborhood of private homes that share a common area and develop a strong sense of community. I'm all for co-housing, and I've met some nice people who plan to live there, but honestly, I grieve the trees. They have been companions to me and sources of beauty. They are living presences that I know play a vital role in keeping life on Earth intact. Scientists tell us that we can't stabilize the climate unless we save trees. Preserving forests is critical to combating climate change. So because of all this, I've taken to praying outdoors. I go outside, feel the good earth beneath my feet and the wind on my face, and I sing to the trees, to oak and beech, hemlock and pines. Making up the words and music as I go along, I sing my grief to the trees that are going down, and my grief for so much more, for what we have lost and are losing, and for what we are likely to lose. I sing my outrage about these beautiful old trees being cut to the roots, their bodies chipped to bits and hauled away to sell. I sing my fury about the predicament we're in as a species. I sing my protest of the political and corporate powers that be, that drive forward relentlessly with business as usual, raising forests, drilling for more oil and fracked gas, digging for more coal, expanding pipeline construction, and opening up public lands and waters to endless exploitation, as if Earth were their private business and they were conducting a liquidation sale. I sing out my shame to the trees, my repentance and apology for the part I have played in Earth's destruction, and for the part my ancestors played when they stole land and chopped down the original forests of the native peoples who lived here. I sing my praise for the beauty of trees and my resolve not to let a day go by that I don't celebrate the precious living world of which we are so blessedly a part. I'm not finished until I sing my determination to renew action for trees and for all of God's creation. I feel God's presence when I pray like that. I dare to believe that the Spirit who longs to renew the face of the earth is praying through me. Praying like this leaves me feeling more alive, connected with myself and with the world I love. So our prayer may need to be really big and loud, bring out the drums, start dancing, move your body, embody that prayer and what you're feeling. Or, our prayer may need to be very, very quiet. In time, people who've experienced trauma or people who are in the midst of trauma, and in some ways I feel like we are all in the midst of a collective trauma right now, feeling it to different degrees, but sensing it nevertheless. People who are in trauma need to find ways to calm down their nervous system and to quiet their breathing, the racing mind, the beating heart. So that's one reason that contemplative prayer is so helpful, to learn ways of praying that are very quiet, that are very still, that help us listen inwardly to the inner voice of love that is always sounding in our hearts, even in the midst of turbulence and confusion. So I wrote just a few lines about that in this chapter. Our prayer may be noisy and expressive, or it may be very quiet. It may be the kind of prayer that depends on listening in stillness and silence with complete attention, listening to the crickets as they pulse at night, listening to the rain as it falls, listening to our breath as we breathe God in and breathe God out, listening to the inner voice of love that is always sounding in our heart. A discipline of contemplative prayer or meditation can set us free from the frantic churn of thoughts and feelings and enable our spirit to rest and roam in a vaster, wilder space. So that's what I have to say about pray. Let me say a few words about learn, act, and advocate. What do we need to learn? What do children, youth, adults need to know in order to live faithfully in a climate changed world? And, what do we need to know? So one place to begin is, what in the world does the Bible have to say about human beings, how we should be treating the land on which all life depends? So we might want to create some programs on the biblical and theological basis for creation care. And I'm going to just put a little shout out to this book that just came out a few weeks ago. I think it came out on Earth Day. It's called The Creation Justice Bible Challenge, a 50-day Bible challenge. And it's 50 little verses from the Bible, each one accompanied by a reflection and a prayer. So this might be a nice, easy way to learn about what does the Bible have to say. I wrote one of the entries, and the other entries are just from folks, Anglican, but I don't think even they're all Anglican, from people all over the world contributed something. Another thing we might need to focus on in the section around learning is, how does climate change connect with other social justice issues like racism or poverty? All those environmentalists used to think of themselves as kind of set apart. It's for white rich people who worry about the environment. We've totally gotten beyond that worldview at this point, because obviously global warming and a changing climate it's not just an environmental issue. It's also an issue, a deep issue of justice, both in this country and around the world. The people who are hurt first and hardest by changing climate are the poor, and especially people of color. All the people who are marginalized and left out are those who are hurt first and hardest by climate change, and they're the ones who don't have a seat at the table where policy and decisions are made. So there's a lot to explore, where churches could be offering book studies or film series, presentations, and there are lots of resources or suggestions on the Diocese of Western Mass website that I posted. The third category is ACT. What practical steps can we take as individuals and households and congregations to live in greater harmony with Earth, to reduce carbon emissions, to make a transition to a zero carbon future? So this is where we do everything we can to cut back on our use of fossil fuels. Starting at lunch today, we can eat lower on the food chain and move to a plant-based diet. We can walk more, we can bicycle, we can install solar panels if we can afford them. There's all kinds of resources and support to do this, including the Episcopal Church's carbon tracker, Sustaining Earth, Our Island Home. I just wanted to take note that when we take these actions, we can take them up as a spiritual practice. This is not just a lot of busy stuff we need to get done. We can carry them out prayerfully as part of our own process of conversion and transformation, as we learn to make more mindful choices and to love the world as God loves it, and to live more gently on earth. And finally, the fourth category is advocate. How will we mobilize for just climate and environmental legislation? How will we contribute to societal transformation? I think public advocacy to protect God's creation has never been more urgently needed than it is today. We're in a climate emergency, which means we're all living at a decisive moment in history, a time when the collective choices we make will affect the well-being and even the survival of the people who come after us, and the life or death of the countless species with whom we share the planet. So it's important to make the personal changes we need to make to live more eco-friendly lives, but we also need systemic change. The scope and the speed of the climate crisis mean that individual actions are important, but they are not enough. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, you've probably heard about these reports, and the latest one was just this last February, that we need to transform our society and our economy at a rate that are historically unprecedented. So to do that, we're going to have to confront the powers that benefit from and keep us stuck in an unjust status quo. So one thing you can do is to join the campaign to push the 4 biggest banks that finance fossil fuels. That would be Chase Bank, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, to push those banks to quit propping up the oil and gas industry. You can sign a pledge. If you're a customer, you've got particular power and leverage. You can sign a pledge if they haven't quit funding fossil fuels by the end of this year, you're going to leave the bank. And if you're not a customer, you can sign a pledge saying, if you're not going to stop funding fossil fuels, I am never going to bank with you. So that's a place where a lot of the current climate justice movement is focusing, is on the power of banks. If we can affect banking and finance, we have a chance. We have a chance to get done what we need to get done. I would like to have some time for Q&A and conversation, so I'm going to skip over doing a review of what's happening across the province. But if you go to your diocesan website, maybe I can post, I'll post the links that I have to Creation Care ministries in most of the dioceses. So you have a chance to check out what's happening in your own diocese. I hope you'll find out, I couldn't find a diocesan Creation Care link for the Diocese of Vermont or Rhode Island, but this is what I was able to capture, and I've spoken to a number of leaders in each diocese. There's a lot going on, and so I just encourage you to find a way to connect with and to support whatever efforts are going on in your diocese. And the Episcopal Church, as you know, offers resources for all the dioceses. Everyone is invited to sign a Episcopal Covenant for the Care of Creation, and you can get monthly newsletters from the Episcopal Church. And I will also invite you, if you'd like, to sign up to receive my monthly newsletter. It comes out on the 1st of the month. If you'd like to know about some current opportunities to pray, learn, act, or advocate. So let me conclude by saying, I titled this talk, The Joy in Climate Justice. So I want to end by saying, okay, where's the joy? Where's the joy? And here's what I would say about that. I think there is joy in living with purpose, in being able to get up in the morning with gratefulness that we have another day in which we can serve the Lord of life. One of my favorite lines in scripture is in John 10:10, when Jesus says, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I read that as his mission statement. He came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And we want to share in that mission of bringing life and sustaining life. So I find joy in sharing in God's mission of reconciling us to each other and to God and to the earth on which all life depends. Archbishop Desmond Tutu called that the supreme work of Jesus Christ, is that all-encompassing reconciliation. So there's joy in knowing that even in the midst of breakdown and uncertainty and heartbreak, that, we're living in a very precarious time. There's joy in knowing that our decisions matter, our choices matter, and love matters most of all. Love is what brought us here. Love is what we're here for, and love is what will welcome us home at our journey's end. So there's joy. Now, I've said what I came to say, and I would love to open it up for conversation. The conversation can go any direction you'd like it to go.
Well, so first of all, I've removed the spotlight, but that means that people may have to change their view. If they want to see the gallery view, they need to go up and change it back to gallery view, because that's a personal setting. I'm doing it right now so I can see everybody. I just wanted, we did welcome Deb Barker right before your talk, and from the Diocese of New Hampshire, and also Dolores Elaine has also come on from the Diocese of Connecticut. So I just wanted to welcome them and recognize their presence before we go into the questions. You will need to, you're all muted. So we muted everyone. So you need to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
There's a good comment in the chat from Deb Baker about connecting, an invitation to connect with her if you'd like some support around sustaining Earth Island Home. Thank you.
Yeah, so Deb, would you want to say something about your work in the Diocese of New Hampshire with Christian?
Just that since fall of 2019, I've been volunteering, supporting congregations who are participating in Sustaining Earth. And as part of that work, I have a 2-page resource guide about talking about climate change in your congregation, and then resources if you're interested in, there's liturgical resources, some recommended books, etc. And then a monthly email that's pretty brief, and it includes a blurb that's ready to use for your bulletin or social media, an outreach idea, a piece of news, which I try to focus on something good that's happening since we all hear so much bad news, and then stories from other folks who are doing this work. So if you would like to receive that, let me know.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, we're saving the chat, so all of the links and the conversation in the chat will be available. I usually transcribe that and send that out to all the participants after the meeting. So if you have anything that you want to say, please feel free to put it in the chat if you don't want to say it out loud. But thank you so much, Margaret. That was joyful around a topic that can be very depressing. Well, the topic is not depressing, but what we see happening can be very depressing.
Right.
Reverend Liz, you have a question. Unmute. You need to unmute.
Yeah. Is there some place in, I guess, in the world, are there places in the world that you would hold up as, let's just say maybe in New Zealand, whereas they culturally are more in tune with creation and are doing more about this than we are? Do you know of examples like that where more than just a few people understand this problem and are doing things about it in a larger setting?
Oh, that's a great question. I just was having supper the other day with a friend who's all involved in a project in Ecuador where they're saving rainforest, tropical rainforest. Their effort, well, I can't answer in sort of wonderful, vivid detail. I know that their effort, there's the Half Earth movement. There's all the movements that are in play, and I don't know how much momentum they have, but we need to set aside areas of land that are for wildlife and are to allow the web of life to continue and evolve without human interference. It's such an interesting predicament. So for whatever we can do locally, just in our own backyard, like I've been getting rid of lawn, and you can put in pollinator gardens, just things we can do just in our own small world, and then to find ways to then amplify the efforts so that we're supporting. If we have any money to give to, you do some philanthropic gifts to the I Love Earth Justice, which is fighting in the courts to save. So
I was thinking of how popular in the American Episcopal Church that the New Zealand prayer book has become. It just zooms off the shelves, and so much of it is about creation. And so I do think that there are folks who, because of where they live, they know more about this than we do. And I think to hold them up as models for making the effort, that when we do this collectively, we can make a difference in our own tradition if we worked on this better. And so I often will go to the New Zealand prayer book when I need, to look at how they also include in their prayer book the native language of other people and so forth that are their indigenous folk. So they've really done a lot of work to try to show that emphasis needs to be placed in those places now.
Thank you. That's a wonderful comment. I also would, I don't have a copy to lift up and show everybody, and I also don't know if anyone here is from the Diocese of Connecticut. Is there someone here from the Diocese of Connecticut?
Yeah.
Anne and Jeffrey Rothorn have produced this beautiful book called God's Good Earth, which is full of liturgies. It's called God's Good Earth. It's full of liturgies. So that's just a terrific resource.
Great. That's good. And what about the Audubon Society? It is such a iconic organization in our culture that we tend to just sort of take it for granted. I think they do a lot to try to raise the possibility that, working with children especially, that give them information.
I don't have the information off the top of my head, but I think one of the dioceses in New England has done some partnering with Audubon Society. And I know that Connecticut has done some partnering with the, what's it called? The Connecticut River Conservation Group, whatever it's called. There's just some wonderful partnerships we can develop. I think in Connecticut, I would really love to do this in Massachusetts. They had a special event that I can't remember whether it involved some kind of cleanup and then there was evensong, there was a prayer time. So it was a combination of caring for the land and praying and relaxing and just being in the presence of God's cathedral. That kind of partnership, I think, has a lot of potential. Also because so many people don't walk inside church anymore. Like they don't think of themselves as churchgoers, but they love the earth and they're concerned. And so for us to create outdoor opportunities for worship and prayer where members of the public can come who might otherwise never set foot inside an Episcopal church, but they want to lament, they want to grieve, they want to praise, they may want to pray even though they don't know it. So anyway, so I think there's a lot of potential in that kind of collaboration.
Any other questions? Comments? Sylvia?
Well, first of all, I want to recall that Reverend Margaret spoke to the Diocese of Connecticut, ECW, a number of years ago. And I'm thankful for that and thankful for this new speech too, because I think there's more coming out. I think Reverend Habecker spoke about children, And I wonder if that's might be a great place to plant seeds. In other words, the education of children through something like Audubon, but also children's books. I mean, that might be a great place to start. And I imagine there are so many books, and always have been, for children that are praises of creation, really, the splendor of creation. So that might be a wonderful, place where emphasis could be made, and inviting children's books, and also related to our worship. I mean, I think of canticles that are these beautiful praises of creation that we, if you do morning prayer and things like that, they always come up. And I think it's a wonderful way to rehearse our love of creation. I just want to share that I'd love to sing, and there are many wonderful songs that, again, are praises of creation. And I also paint. In later life, I've taken up watercolor, and I do landscapes. And I have this thing about where I live, Westport, Connecticut, which is on the coast, and we also have a beautiful river in town. And I've been frantically trying to capture the beauty of these places as some of it slips away with building that's going up all around, the coast of the river, for example, and suddenly, you don't have the view of the river in town. And these kinds of losses, again, you mourn the loss, lament, but I also think, this is beautiful. Can we share this so people understand that there's a loss there? We have fought, builders coming in, but, sometimes it's a real losing battle. That's what I lament, and that's what bothers me most.
Yeah, thank you.
More questions or comments?
I just want to thank you, Margaret. This was just wonderful and so wide-ranging. And I had never, and maybe it shows the limit of my reading, but I would never have associated Thomas Aquinas or Martin Luther with making these key theological statements so anyway, the way that you wove everything around, I hadn't also thought about the relationship between the way that we care about our bodies and the way we care about the earth, and the whole physical environment, and a lot of the disordered eating that is really endemic in our culture, the way that can be tied into our blind spots in terms of environmental care. So I have this long list of things I learned this morning, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. And I will say, when I found that quote from Martin Luther, I thought that is too good to be true. That sounds like something you see on the internet, like all these things attributed to the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama never said that. And so I always had sort of an asterisk in my mind of like, well, maybe he said that and maybe he didn't. But then I gave a presentation somewhere, and there was an actual scholar who said, oh, that comes from, and I've already forgotten the name of the book, but it's real. Martin Luther actually did reflect in this way on the natural world. And I found that incredibly heartening. Yeah. We just have to reclaim it. We've kind of, we're on a journey back to reclaiming a deeper understanding.
Well, and so much of our tradition, particularly from Aquinas and Luther, are, denial of the body, denial of the physical, the centrality of the cross as the suffering body, that we have to endure, not that we have to heal. And so it just flips things around a lot. So.
Other questions or comments? Well, oh, I'm sorry. Somebody there?
I was going to say, I'm not going to say too much because there's so much that I could say. I am so very grateful for your presentation, for the prayerful way in which you shared what you shared with us. I found it very moving. Used a few Kleenexes. But as you say, there is hope and there is joy, and that's what we live out of. And thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I also want to say, I'll just say, because we're all a group of women here, I just feel like there's some energy around women and women's understanding of body and earth and the divine that I just really want to lift up and be grateful for, because I do. For example, there's a climate activist group called Mothers Out Front, which I love. I love the framing of that mothers know how to love fiercely. I have this image of like the child gets hit by a car or something, and the mother accesses this enormous strength to lift the car up. I mean, there are these stories of the power, just the power of love. And I'm thinking the power of mother love, womanly love. So I don't know, I feel like there's a mystery here that I've only begun to explore, much less understand. But I just want to acknowledge that the women power here.
Rowan says, I used to work for Mothers Out Front, actually. They have a lot of active chapters in Massachusetts. Some, lost the last piece of it there.
They've got some connection to Episcopal churches around Boston as well through their members, but they're a great organization.
Oh, thank you, Rowan. Yeah. And also, I'll do a little shout out for, I'm sure you've all heard of Sunrise Movement. It's the climate movement for young people under 30. Well, Bill McKibben just started something for folks 60 years old and over, which is called Third Act. So if you go to thirdact.org, it's for us older folks over 60.
We're not done yet.
We are so not done. This is our best and most beautiful third act. So I commend that to you. They have these monthly conferences, which are beautifully organized. I love watching whatever Bill McKibben is up to. Is it's going to be high quality. So anyway, I commend thirdact.org to you if you want a way to connect and be part of a larger movement.
And I know they did this before to tag on. I've just started reading. Actually, my husband and I are reading it out loud. It's just a wonderful book and really embodies this talk in a bigger, of course, bigger way. But it's not only about the environment. So I mean, it's easy to say, oh yeah, creation care. Right, that's for those people that like creation care. But this book is more about reconciliation with God, with the body, with the earth, with others. It's ecumenical, it's interreligious connection and reconciliation. The little that I've read so far, but so I just think it's a wonderful foundation book that we could actually lift up just to read together or individually or whatever. And there was something else I was going to say, about the connection, compartmentalizing, creation care over here, but it's not. It's also a social justice issue when you look at who's going to be impacted by climate change. And it is. I mean, look at New Orleans. Who was impacted? It was the 9th Ward. It was the poor people who were impacted there. And that's the way it will be around the world. And actually, poor people are going to be impacted by rising gas prices too. They're the people that are going to be impacted. However, and here's my question. I got 3 of the banks, Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo. Who was the 4th?
Bank of America.
Bank of America.
If you go to thirdact.org, you can, that's one of their big campaigns is around banking. Yeah.
Yeah. Because as many know, the Diocese of Western Massachusetts, when Bishop Doug became bishop, one of his first tasks was to discuss with our endowment corporation that runs the mutual fund for the diocese to divest in fossil fuels. And that was done. And then that also got brought to General Convention, and the General Convention is divesting of fossil fuels. And so, I mean, we can all do our put the light, starting with the light bulbs, the light bulbs. if you can, solar. My husband drags me kicking and screaming. So he rides a bicycle several days a week to work, and he has an electric car, and he put solar panels on our roof. When he said the plant-based diet, I went a little off the wall, but I'm trying to get my head around that. But so we can all make our little personal choices, and they add up and make change. But really, the corporate machine is going to be tough unless individuals do what you suggested. Write to your bank and say, actually, I bank with Citibank. I will now go and I'll sign that petition. I'll do that tomorrow.
Oh, that's great. And the power is like, don't get out of the bank today. Wait until the moment when everyone gets out of the bank at the same time, because that's what gets, so what if one individual leaves the bank? But when we all do it together, thousands and thousands of people all together are leaving Bank of America or whatever. That will flag someone's attention.
Yes. But starting with the petition or whatever, or the request. They really do have, I did this silly thing years ago when I saw trans fats were horrible. I started writing to the bread companies that we brought bread from and saying, why? Get this out of there. And I felt like this little tiny voice, but it only took a couple of years, and trans fats are out of most major breads now. Mm-hmm. So, I think those little things can make a difference.
Well, I lived in Ohio when the Cuyahoga River erupted in spontaneous combustion, and I helped to start a Consumers for Environmental Action in those days, and Rachel Carson was my hero. And phosphates was the issue then, one of the issues then, and gradually the smaller voices became a larger voice, and the detergent companies, all these different fertilizers and everything. You think it's just too much to take on, but you do. And the things that have already been done are not listed. So it's hard to say we're getting anywhere, but if you keep doing it, you do get somewhere. And I just want to give people hope that recycling became a reality because of smaller voices back when saying we need to use these things over again. And they can't just throw everything away. And so gradually, we do these things. Maybe not to the extent we should, but we do them now, and we didn't do them at all. And so there's no sense of having gotten anywhere with the problems if we don't at least every now and then recall things that have been taken on, and there are improvements, so that gives us courage to be a voice, one voice, or whether it's with the bank or now or whatever, because those were the ways we accomplished anything at all from the beginning. Unwrap those trusted up tomatoes in the produce section and say, I only want one. I don't want these 4 that are all wrapped in this saran wrap. Get rid of this kind of packaging. You don't see much of that as it used to. There are all kinds of ways and inroads, but it is the smaller people who, if each one takes their turn, we do have an impact.
Yep, the power of one.
That's what the Daughters of the King's motto, I'm only one person, but I am.
That's right. Yeah.
And
well, anything else for the good of the kingdom here?
Yeah, when you plant your gardens at home, don't use the phosphate fertilizers.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
If you can, compost. And I belong to a collaborative for cleaning products, cleaning and paper products and that kind of thing.
All that matters. Yep.
Yeah, that you've probably seen advertised in television now because they've gone public, which is the Grow Collaborative. Their goal is to be totally plastic free in the next 3 years, and they will be, because they're already plastic neutral. And so many products that they sell, they plant so many trees. It's kind of, it makes me feel like I have some power. And it doesn't cost anything to belong.
Yeah, they add up. All those initiatives add up, I think, and gives us hope and brings us joy. And I wrote other things, living with purpose. Yeah.